Buenos días.
Good morning. My name is Greg Watson. I am the lead specialist on natural capital of the IDB. I have a great panel with us with panelists who are going to share their perspective on the importance of biodiversity and natural capital. In the President's opening remarks, it became clear that we have no time to lose. Climate change is one of the biggest drivers behind biodiversity loss. The environment is our biggest ally in taking on this challenge. We also know that the environment has a close link to the social and economic agendas in our countries. That is not only something that has to do with birds and fish. The IDB is working actively on this. We are going back to natural capital in our work, providing support for countries to include natural capital in their policies and investment strategies, and also driving financial investment in the market with government partners. Against this backdrop, we bring our panelists to you today. They're going to share their experience on these issues. We are going to begin with a first round of questions for each of the panelists, and we'll give them 5 minutes to answer. I'll begin with Dr. Carola Moreno, who is the Finance and International Affairs Coordinator in the Ministry of Finance of Chile. Ms. Moreno, it is truly an honor, and it was an honor for the IDB to work with you in creating the first trust fund for conservation in Chile. Based on the success of this initiative, Chile is beginning to integrate the value of nature in economic analysis across a number of different ministries by creating a national committee on natural capital. The IDB is also working with you on this. Could you share a little bit more about that work? Why this effort matters for Chile at this time, and also what you, as a representative of the Finance Ministry, are looking for? Thank you very much, Gregory. Thank you to the IDB for having me. I'd like to acknowledge all of my fellow panelists and everyone in the audience. Let me just say that Chile is a country that has a very rich biodiversity. The financing is falling short of what is needed, and therefore the Finance Ministry, in keeping with what it has to do under the Environmental Act, is in charge of creating the necessary financial policies. This is what led to the creation of this Natural Capital Committee. This is an advisory panel that advises and counsels the president. And the idea for this committee is to go above and beyond. This is not a committee for any given administration. The first goal it has is to create an approach that allows it to really appreciate the value of ecosystem services. This is why we need to understand what the natural capital stock is, but based on that, come to an assessment not only of what the forest represents, but also how there are services that come from this that go beyond what is tangible. That is a long-term initiative, an effort that also comes with the responsibility of being able to leverage that information and inform policies so that this growth that we tend to call sustainable growth, for it to really be sustainable, and for there to be economic growth that doesn't come to be at the expense of natural capital, which could lead to losing our ecosystems. This is an impact we've seen before. And so overall, the idea is to increase in financing, but to do that, we need data, not just on natural capital, but also on other issues. I won't go into too many details there, but we do work a great deal with the IDB, of course. We thank the IDB for being with us, but we also need the private sector to join us in order to have true cooperation between the public and private sector. So in a nutshell, that has been our experience. Thank you, Dr. Moreno. That's exactly right. We need to have more interconnected action within the climate and diversity actions and use that value in decision making, and not only to have more efficient public spending, but as you said, That can also bring more private investment into the mix. To elaborate on that a little bit more, we have Slav Gachev, who's the managing director of Sustainable Debt Nature Conservancy, and the question will be in English.
There's been a lot of discussion of Barbados' debt for nature conversion, which was the first time a development bank supported this kind of structure. In this deal, TNC worked with the IDB, providing a $50 million guarantee, which combined with a $100 million guarantee from the IDB, simultaneously reduced the country's debt burden and funded a long-term marine natural capital investment. Given that many other countries are now exploring similar deals, what are your thoughts on the importance of these operations, the emerging structure, and the role of organizations like TNC?
Thanks so much, Greg, and thanks to the BID for inviting me, and apologies for speaking in English. I come from Bulgaria, and in the United States, many people confuse Bulgaria and Bolivia, so maybe I should be more fluent in Spanish, but I kind of, don't know all the technical words, so I excuse my English here. And indeed, Greg, many countries are facing, if you will, a triple biodiversity, climate, and debt crisis in the region. Looking globally, fully 1/3 or 30 countries that are members of the Emerging Market Bond Index right now facing yields to maturity exceeding 10%. Which practically means that they're shut out of the international capital markets. And in your region, in our region, 10 sovereigns are either in default or facing, very high yields exceeding 10%. And in a way, these are the lucky ones. You can call them, you could say that now they're facing a degree of distress, but they tend to be even the larger countries that floated Eurobonds in the first place, let alone some of the more frontier markets that were shut out from the international markets in the first place. And so together with you, together with the IDB, we came up with a solution that addresses this triple crisis at its core. And that is to refinance pre-existing unsustainable sovereign debt at lower rates, thus generating substantial savings that can then be invested in biodiversity and climate outcomes. And so indeed, in that landmark transaction that we did together, which closed last September, we refinanced $150 million of pre-existing Barbados debt with a new facility arranged by Credit Suisse and CIBC. They're in the audience, so say hi. Benefiting from co-guarantees by, indeed, IDB providing $100 million and TNC providing $50 million. And this was a super innovative structure because effectively IDB figured out how to use their policy-based guarantee in this context to effectively create a truly meaningful sustainability-linked issuance. And so I have to give major props to IDB as a global leader in this respect among the multilateral development banks. You truly have blazed the trail there. And we were super honored to be partnering with Prime Minister Mia Mottley and her visionary government. And Mia Mottley and her government agreed to channel 100% of the savings, $50 million out of the $150 million issuance over 15 years, towards protecting Barbados's exclusive economic zone, its ocean. And the ocean is very much on our minds. Panama, right here, hosted just a couple weeks ago the Global Ocean Summit, and the ocean is the least funded of all the sustainable development goals, and that's why it's very important to invest in it, which we did also about now 18 months ago in Belize, where we did the first of these modern era debt conversions or debt for nature swaps, where we refinanced $550 million of pre-existing Belizean debt, unlocking $180 million over a 20-year period. And so, in summary, these deals are sizable. They move the needle for willing sovereigns. In many instances, the funding that they unlock, double or triple pre-existing budgets for biodiversity, and the savings get channeled through independent domestic conservation funds like Fondo Acción that we're going to hear about very shortly. And so also in the case of Belize and Barbados, this allowed the governments to protect 30% of their oceans. And so, we at TNC, we want to continue to move forward with this theme. We have several other deals in the pipeline that we're hoping to do with you, Greg, and your colleagues. And moving also adding to this theme, future deals can focus, for example, on the Amazon and tropical forest conservation, which I know is the theme of a follow-on panel. And so, we will plow ahead and help to address these challenges through this innovative financial mechanism.
Great, thanks, Slav. I do think the Barbados Debt for Nature transaction is a success story of showing how targets on the environmental side can link to key performance indicators on the financial side, and we can wrap all of this together. And it's critical financial innovation for large-scale finance. Continuando con esa conversación.
Now, in keeping this conversation going on financing, I would like to turn to Mr. Federico Martinez Waltos, the Chief Administrative Officer of the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development, Argentina. One of the key issues on COP15 on biodiversity was a growing excitement around diversity credits and how that can lead to new markets. The IDB and IDB Lab have been helping with tokenization of natural assets. The IDB is supporting and being part of creating new classes of natural assets. In Argentina, you're also exploring a new and exciting class of assets. NFT tokens and its creation helps with natural capital. This can create value flows to conserve and restore biodiversity and can lead to more revenue for the government. Can you talk to us about that program and the necessary work to make that market possible, and when that token is going to come into existence? Thank you, Gregory, and good morning, everyone. Greetings from my fellow panelists. The Eco Token is an initiative we've been working on within the government that started last year. We're very excited about this. It's really important for us to be here to talk about this project. Where did this come from? This was in response to the current climate crisis affecting us all, really, and also the shortcoming, or should I say, the lack of implementation means and incentives. That is where the government, with the available technology and with work that cut across different sections and organizations, came together to actually make progress on this. So what is this? This is a novel tool. This is a financial mechanism that seeks to align funds to funnel them to to sustainable development programs. There are these social reports and other monitoring activities that are being conducted through blockchain. And the idea is to create this instrument, again, that can help us channel existing funds, create innovative instruments, and also meet specific demands that our country has on the ground. We very much applaud and welcome the support we get from the IDB on this initiative. Obviously, we are strongly making headway with our first pilot in the north of our country in a national park. This is in Chaco province, and so we're partnering with that province. We're our federal system, and so that's how we work. And we have 7 specific work streams. We have the legal area. That's where we're working with the IDB. Thank you to the IDB for the support. When it comes to outreach and participation, particularly with the Escazú agreement that was ratified by our country. There's also the MRB's design and implementation that we're working on with the World Bank. There's the technology development of blockchain. There's a Casa de la Moneda government agency working on this. And the MRB measurement system with a nature map that is working on this, obviously getting support from government agencies like CONAI and ARSA, which make it easier to access information, technology, and satellite technology, etc. And the idea is to be able to tap into the best available information to measure these ecosystem services that we get from our biodiversity. In 2004, Argentina came up with a very interesting position. The idea was to actually highlight the value of these ecosystem services, especially in our country where we have 40% of the world's biodiversity. We have ecosystem services that allow us to pretty much have the kinds of conditions to still be alive as a species. This is why we need to find the right mechanisms to keep going forward. And so we're pitching one today, but we know there are other initiatives. And the idea is to actually utilize these services and make the most of them. We are environmental lenders as well. And that's why we want to make the most of the services we provide. These are the tools that we have come up with to better channel these financial flows. We would like to encourage everyone to be part of this effort. This is a collective effort. We're consistently raising the bar. And we know that we are facing high expectations. We're creating something new. We're discussing things that have to do with the very definition of traditional economic notions. And so this is why we have tapped all levels of government, and I'd like to thank everyone for their cooperation so we can continue moving forward on this. Thank you very much. That's a very interesting example of an alternative market. We can also make more of regulated markets and more traditional markets for biodiversity finance. We're tapping into all of the work that has already been done to take on the climate challenge as it pertains to biodiversity. And that brings us to another field example, but this time we're focusing more on carbon credits and how they can be used to have a bigger social impact. We have Director Arango, who is with us from Fondo Acción. Fondo Acción has a lot of experience on climate projects, working with Black communities and indigenous communities. Can you talk to us about a project that involved carbon credits and how the same logic can be applied for the biodiversity agenda? What do you believe the bank's role should be in these kinds of projects and processes, especially when we think about the Afro-descendant community and indigenous communities? Thank you, Greg, and thank you for this opportunity to talk to you about our experience. This is something everyone is talking about, but also that leads to a lot of questions. There is a Colombian environmental fund known as an ETF, Environmental Trust. It was created in 2000 to have the first debt relief program between Colombia and the United States, as well as a first debt swap, which means that from the very beginning we were part of designing and operating financial sustainability mechanisms. In 2009, when we started working on these lowering emissions from deforestation and environmental degradation, we started to get a reputation. We were working on the enabling conditions so that projects to lower emissions, taking into account biodiversity and social benefits, so that all of that can become a reality, because it seemed to us to be a mechanism that could help us finally settle this dilemma, how to have human development at the heart of conservation efforts. That was a 14-year-long road, starting when it was created, and we've been able to work on 12 different projects, wearing different hats. These aren't only carbon-based projects. Of course, they work on biodiversity conservation, and they use this currency that's known as carbon, but these are these kind of red, REDD projects. I have a portfolio of 8 different projects. As a matter of fact, there's been support from the IDB through the Fondo Colombia for Sustainable Environment, and these are red projects in the Pacific side of Colombia, but they belong to 20 Black and indigenous communities. One is Black Colombian, the other is indigenous communities, and these are these bio projects. Altogether, They cover 800,000 hectares of tropical rainforests in the Pacific and benefit over 50,000 people. These are minority projects. There is no middleman that is the intermediary between those providing the service and those benefiting from the service. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that and how we were able to turn this stroke of genius sounding idea into something that is real. This started in 2015. We started seeing these projects come into play in the carbon market mindset. The carbon tax was also created by the tax authorities. I know that this is probably a topic for a different setting, but that portfolio has led to 10 million even the international market. 700,000 forest hectares have been preserved, and they are home to at least 70 indigenous species and endangered species. Deforestation of 30,000 hectares in forests have been turned away, diverted, thanks to what is coming from carbon financing, which has turned these activities into different kinds of activities and keeping the forest alive. I know that all of you are here at an IDB meeting, and I'm sure you want to hear about things that are less poetic and not so much about the look as anything else, thinking about biodiversity. But these resources invested by those communities have allowed, in many cases, to actually change how people move around. There are piers that have been built and wharfs and bridges. There is the Andes erosion that has been prevented. Water supply systems have been transformed. There has been a reconditioning of supply systems. Basic sanitation has been improved by using wastewater and rainwater. These communities, with all of these resources, have been able to create healthcare teams in different areas. And just as an aside, these are isolated communities. There's no airport. Many times they only have access to places by water. And during COVID, these resources allowed for actually addressing the COVID emergency. It was the sale of these carbon credits that helped with biodiversity, that helped address the COVID emergency. Now, in terms of the complementary value chains, we have cacao, we have coconut, and other crops that are part of that business. And so this is a mechanism to fund biodiversity using carbon as a currency. What can the IDB do here, just to get to the last question? I would say that in general, and I have to say this, I know that it may sound abstract and broad, but we need to actually galvanize these peer organizations in order to make natural capital and the value of natural capital be at the heart of a new growth model. We have a model where natural capital tends to be in satellite accounts and not in the core account. We need to also increase more green taxonomy and combined and blended accountability or accounting rather models and other mechanisms so that the financial sector can adopt these measures and flow more resources to those who own the land and who ultimately make the call. What are we doing with this land? And for that decision to be protected by the financial system. Financing member countries as well to build the kind of organizational and institutional regulatory infrastructure that's needed for biodiversity markets. We read all the time that there are problems in the carbon market, of course, but let's create a biodiversity market that can draw from lessons learned with strong government, with strong regulation, and with the ability to actually enforce those regulations, especially when we think about biodiversity, because that is ultimately in the hands of local communities. We need to protect with strong safeguards these communities' rights, which for generations have been the stewards of these forests and are now being dealt with intermediaries that are keeping most of the funds in their pockets. Lastly, working with the services sector, the tertiary sector, NGOs, the government, and civil society, that's a perfect partnership for building a bridge between the local community, governments, and development banks.
Thank you, Natalia. You definitely gave us a long list of things to do. And with that, we can go on to our last panelist, Rosalba Miro, from the Audubon Society here in Panama. The Audubon Society has a project here in Panama financed by the IDB with resources from the United Kingdom. And it is for coastal systems, for mangroves, and looking at the policy value. But also there are other incentives having to do with behavioral changes involving women, young people, owners of infrastructure, government, everything that you were saying. So, Rosabel, actually, you are working with all of those that receive services from this ecosystem. Could you tell us a bit about the project approach? How is it creating a policy that favors changes, and what are the expected results? Thank you, and good morning. I am pleased to be able to take part in this panel. I come from a very small organization here in Panama, Organizate Panama. We've been working for 50 years, and we have had a great opportunity of being included in this project. It is because working with the National Audubon Society, we were able to come up with this great idea of approaching the IDB and creating this project that is very closely tied to the title of this panel, and that is biodiversity for our benefit, for development. So the blue property tries to build and improve the coastal areas of Panama. We want to protect the mangroves, the wetlands that are associated with them, and we hope to be able to do this through scientific research by gathering information on how much carbon is captured by these mangroves, and we want to highlight the biodiversity that lives in them. Every time that we walk through these places, every time we gather information, we realize how valuable our coastal wetlands are here in Panama. Also, this project tries to improve the livelihoods of the people living in these areas, and that is something that we are doing by working with education. We're reaching these communities, educating them, working with local authorities to improve policies and also to improve behavior. We want to make certain that they be fully aware of how important these wetlands are. Now, this blue economy has helped us develop a strategy, and we have a conservation plan for the bay, Amarita Bay, one of the places that we're working. And I forgot to mention that we have the Panama Bay, but also we did some important activities. We were received by the communities, and together we have a strategy to deal with the challenges. And right now, several communities realize that the sea level is rising as a result of climate change, also pollution, a loss of habitat. All of these things concern them. And we're also seeing that land management is absolutely essential right now, where we are losing coast, not only because of erosion, but also because of the sea level rise. These places in both bays where we're working closely with the schools, with the teachers, with children, so as to create greater environmental literacy, for them to be acquainted with biodiversity, wetlands, learn more about climate changes, the water cycle, energy, all of these different issues that if we aren't educated, we will not be able to deal with all of these problems that are related to risk. There are many communities that are dealing with risks. And so these children, even though they are very young, need to know how to deal with the risks. Now, with the Ministry of Education, we're working with them. We have a project that we call the Green Classroom, and it's a project, and last year, thanks to that project, with the IDB, we were able to reach 18 schools in both of the sites. And what we want to do is to reach more and more schools so as to teach about the importance of wetlands in the Bahia de Panama and the Bahia de Garita. Also, we're working with the communities, and we are promoting through this project conservation of wetlands, working with other actors of societies, CSOs, companies, local organizations, scientists, all of this with a view to creating a national chapter of the International Partnership for Wetlands. And that is going to allow us to work side by side with the National Wetlands Committee that was created here in Panama in 2006. It supports the government, and it provides advice in terms of wetlands and implementing the Ramsar Convention. This is part of implementing the Ramsar Convention. So this is a good point. I have been engaged in this effort personally for 25 years, and the organization is working on everything related to wetlands. So this is a good time to form these partnerships so as to get better cooperation, not only at the local level, but also internationally, so we can create local and regional initiatives, new policies that favor conservation of mangroves and wetlands, and that has helped us form media campaigns. So we share this message of the importance of mangroves, and we look at how we can share this information because we think we know a lot, but there's much more to be learned. And it's important to not only look at the North-South relationship, but a worldwide relationship. Now, in terms of result of the project, we see that this project is going to allow our authorities to base their policies on science and technology so they can improve their environmental and climate agenda and its management, not only locally, but nationally. The commitment that we have with the nationally determined contributions is something that is supported by the government, and we want the NDCs to be effective. Thank you. Thank you, Rosabel. And a very important thing that you just said is that, and it's something we hadn't spoken about before, is that everything comes in, but it's important that it be science-based. It's important to have an economic assessment that is well done, and it has to also be based on science. All of us consider that to be essential. We have 10 more minutes, so I do have another question. We talked about policy, financial, social innovations, and everything that is moving the financial needle. So we see that a major cooperative effort is required amongst all of us. We need to work with governments, NGOs, so as to attain the ambitious objectives of the global framework for biodiversity that was just approved in Montreal in 2015. That is going to guide countries, the private sector, NGOs, all of us, guide us in terms of everything we do up to 2030. So from your standpoint, what will your organization do in the short term to begin to implement this global framework? And how can the IDB support you? Can you take 1 minute, please, to quickly respond to my question? I'm going to begin here on my left. I'm sorry. I wanted to say that the role played by the Ministries of Finance is very important. A country that was in charge of promoting this platform for the ministries of finance was the IDB. That's why I bring it up. We have regional support. And one of the commitments, and from the Ministry of Finance, the agenda that we have was well aligned with this effort. So we collaborate within that platform with other countries. We collaborate internally with other ministries. I already talked about the Natural Capital Committee, the Ministry of the Economy, the Ministry of Finance, and the Ministry of Environment, of course, and also with the technical advice coming from the Central Bank of Chile and the Council on Science, Technology, and Innovation. So all of this is very important because we interact a lot with the private sector, something that I already mentioned. And this is aligned with one of the objectives, which is trying to engage the private sector so as to be able to mobilize resources. And I would conclude by saying that the role of the Ministry of Finance in this connection is to create certainty, to put together rules of the game, a strategy, so that the other actors can be involved. Another important role is to mobilize resources, and there the Ministry of Finance was quite innovative. We heard mention of the sustainability-linked bonds. We, in Chile, launched the first sovereign bond, and now we want to issue a bond on biodiversity. So I hear keywords, coordination and rules.
Discussion. I'm going to take 30 seconds to reflect on what the prior panelists said about the conservation funds, because this point cannot be overestimated or overemphasized. The world of global finance is weird and wonderful. It looks more like a circus now, but this too shall pass. But that doesn't matter as much. Whatever we do here in this room, ultimately what we produce, the bleeding edge of what we do, is what these guys are doing, right? Through Fondo Acción and the Audubon Society of Panama and organizations like that. And so they are the ones who take, the proceeds, if you will, from these financings and fund real action on the ground. And so that role is fascinating and super, super important. And that's why we at TNC have had such a pleasure and privilege to work with Siempre Costa Rica, for example, seeding these conservation funds with the hope that they will grow wings and transcend the initial financing and do a lot more going forward. And so doing a lot more going forward is exactly what we want to do at TNC to be in compliance and aligned and helpful to the global biodiversity framework. We were one of the organizations that was advocating very actively for the passage of that global treaty effectively. I was privileged with you to be in Montreal when the treaty was passed, and our whole organization for years, even before the passage of the treaty, when you think about all these deals, they're aligned, right? They foreshadow the global biodiversity framework and 30 by 30. And so as an organization, we have our 2030 goals, which are basically meant to move the needle towards these objectives. And so that strategies is one of the key pathways towards that objective. And so I'm going to get now to my punchline, Greg, which is that here, your board of directors will meet in just 48 hours or so. And so I have one early Christmas wish list, okay, which is the following. Your guarantee product is extremely powerful, can be even more powerful in mobilizing external financing, debt capital market financing, to transcend, the constrained credit rating of many sovereigns, Chile and Uruguay excluded, right? And to be able to do so even more aggressively, I believe, the IDB would benefit from not using $1 of guarantee capacity, right, against $1 of direct lending capacity. And you already, thank you. You already have demonstrated that in a very creative way through your rapid response facilities, right, for climate and other disasters, where those lines of credit do not absorb one-to-one the lending headroom of countries. And so if your board, if there are governors here, you know, I'm lobbying you directly from this stage to be thinking about how to mobilize external funding where the leverage effect would be so much greater than one-to-one. So I'm off my soapbox.
Thanks. Estoy consciente del tiempo.
I'm keeping my eye on the clock, so I'll go on to the other panel members. Federico? In Argentina, we're really happy that there is a roadmap, like the agreement that we are talking about today. It's important that there be that roadmap, but at the same time, we think it's even more important to have the means to reach those goals. And that is why we continue to call for the commitments that have been taken on by developing countries be complied with, and that they have the means to implement them. Also, in the South, we are generating these innovative mechanisms. We are engaged in these initiatives using technology that is available, scientific knowledge, but we think that it is really important to be able to move ahead in terms of looking at the means for implementation. Our country just signed a contract with the IDB, and it is for Hirsu 2. That is the management of solid urban waste. And tomorrow, the minister, along with the president, will be inaugurating an environmental center that allows us to take concrete action in the field that will make a reality happen for people that are working in a dump. This is in Concordia, in the province of Entre Rios, one of the poorest communities in our country. So to have something that focuses on natural capital, this is something that we would ask for support from the IDB board and from other transnationals. These are things that we need to take concrete action. In terms of our goals, we are making important strides. We have increased our protected areas. We are creating a new protected area in the ocean, a marine protected area that will go to Congress soon. We are strengthening the budget using resources from the Ministry of the Environment. Basically, that budget has doubled in the last few years. And also, we are looking at an investment between $50 and $100 million to strengthen communities. As we said, it's the communities that protect our forests. So basically, that is the end of my comment. Thank you. Natalia? The fund was created as a way to facilitate the Biodiversity Convention. So we focus on those activities. But to respond to your question, I would focus on goals 1, 2, and 3. That would be creation of protected areas, maintenance of those areas, for example, with the Environmental Heritage Fund, or another fund that benefits 3 protected areas. These are long-term mechanisms. Then goal 8, which is to minimize the impact of climate change. That's a program I really like. The Climate Action Fund for boys and girls that focuses on adaptation, mitigation of climate change in the most vulnerable places with the most vulnerable population. There we have donations coming from civil society, and we hope that that can become permanent. Also, goal 11, which is nature-based solutions. That is a fund that I was describing, the Climate Action Fund, but we're beginning another project with German support, and there we have nature-based solutions. Also, the green and the blue economy, there we have technical and administrative funds so as to reduce emissions and protect biodiversity in communities. And then 19, goal 19, financing with the mechanisms that we already have. So we have donations, also sovereign funds with very long duration, also debt swaps, other mechanisms. We're working closely with the private sector on different impact modalities. And lastly, strengthening communities, not as co-beneficiaries, but as owners of the decision-making. Now, what can the IDB do? It can mobilize resources for nature-based solutions, especially focusing on long-term action. That has the greatest impact. For example, the Carbon Fund, environmental impact, also working with the owners of the land. They are the ones that make the decisions. Also putting natural capital in the center of our minds. Isabel, 1 minute, we're over time. The global biodiversity framework leads us to work on conserving species to avoid their extinction. Two very specific examples here in Panama. We have species, sometimes we don't know what their life cycle is like, and we have to gather information for the life cycle to know how to protect these. We have the cotinga, and that bird lives in the mangroves east of Panama. Right now, those mangroves are being promoted to build a multimodal port, and that is, the environmental groups are not in favor of building that port because of the destruction this will cause. Another example is the pájaro hermoso. It lives in the cloud forest in the highlands. It's called cotinga, or umbrella bird. It has beautiful feathers, and it's called an umbrella bird. And it migrates from the highlands to the lowlands in the Caribbean and Panama. And it lives in forests that are currently being destroyed to mine, to do open pit mining in Panama. An activity that is very questioned right now. It doesn't have a completely legal existence. Actually, the mining is illegal, and we need to gather information to see how we can preserve these sites to protect these species and avoid their extinction. Now, what do we need from the IDB? Collaboration. Collaboration with local groups. There is already information that has been gathered in the case of mining. Panama is not a country well suited to mining, and we need local groups to be strengthened. They need to learn more about how to deal with these problems, and there the IDB can help us, not only by making certain that these species will not become extinct, but also making sure that our local groups are strengthened. Thank you. Thank you. We have gone over time, so I'm not going to say much as closing remarks, just to say that we know that solutions that are positive for nature can create $10 billion of wealth in the world. And in the IDB, we are committed to leadership. We want to bring to the table experience, knowledge, and we want to collaborate with all of the players here. We talked a lot about the linkage between policy and finance and the work that we have to do to make sure that natural capital is mainstreamed and that it be seen as part of development as well as social and economic cycles. So I conclude, and that way we can go on to the second panel of this session. Thank you.